Hello. So welcome to our introduction to Microsoft Excel. What we're going to do in this video is show you a few ways that you can use an Excel spreadsheet to analyze data in the lab. In this part, we'll focus on just entering data and then doing some simple calculations, namely calculating the mean of some repeated measurements and the uncertainty in the mean. So first, let's have a look at the spreadsheet. You can see that the main part of the spreadsheet consists of a bunch of rows that are all labeled by numbers and columns that are labeled by letters. So any particular location in the spreadsheet is called a cell, has a unique identifier given by the number and the letter, in this case, C7. So when you start using a spreadsheet, it's a good idea to add some documentation so you know what's to expect if you open it later. And so we're going to look at some data for extension of a spring as measured as we add weights of different mass to that they're hung from the spring. So label it just with that basic experiment idea. We're looking at the extension of a spring. I'm going to add the date, just so that we can keep track of if we take a new set of data. And then I'm going to add my name, so if anybody needs to contact me about the data, they can do that. So it's just some basic information to help identify the data. Next, we would start adding data in usually in columns, X in one column, Y values in another column. In this case, our mass is the X value and the extension is the Y value, and I could add numbers here one cell at a time, but that would take a while, particularly because I've done an experiment where I've repeated the measurement at each mass 5 times so that we can calculate the mean of that measurement. So I've copied all the data onto a second sheet in this workbook. So on sheet 2, we can look at the data that has been taken. So we have applied a load or a mass, and that has is measured in units of kilograms. Always good to have all your units here. And then we have 5 trials measuring the extension, and the units here are in meters. Just to make this a little tidier and more like a little easier to read, I'm going to merge these cells across the top, and then this label will go across all 5 trials. And I'm going to put it in bold to put the main things here, load and extension in bold. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is calculate the mean value of the data. So I'm going to label a column. We're going to take the mean of these 5 trials, and we can enter the formula for the mean. You can enter a formula in Excel using the equal sign. So I'm going to take those 5 values, and I'm going to refer to them by their cell number. And I'm going to start with a bracket, because eventually I'm going to take the sum and I'm going to divide by the number of trials. So if you click on the cell, then you add that number and a plus sign to add them all up. And I can put my 5 values with 4 plus signs in here. And then another bracket. Divide by the number, and I want to divide by the number of measurements, which is 5. Okay, now I would need to fill in the other boxes here, but I don't need to repeat that entry. I can automatically fill all the cells in the row, all the cells in the column by attaching to the little square here on the bottom right-hand corner of the cell and dragging it down. And it'll automatically fill each cell with the same formula, but for the corresponding row. For example, this formula here corresponds to the row 16. Now, the Excel comes with a whole bunch of functions, and one of them is average. So you can actually calculate the average automatically without having to add them up and divide by the number of measurements, and it'll figure out how many measurements there are and that sort of thing as well. Now you see it's used different number of decimal points. So I'm going to add a decimal point here in this number section of the top bar. I can increase to another decimal point. So I'm keeping 1 for rounding later. And again, I can fill that column with the values. Next thing I can do is calculate standard deviation. If I want the uncertainty of the mean, remember I need the standard deviation of the mean. And I start, the first part of that is the standard deviation. I divide by the square root of n minus 1. The standard deviation, there's a formula for that as well, standard deviation. And there's several varieties here, depending on your data. Dot P is if you have a bunch of numbers and you don't have funny letters or something in your columns, but we have nice 5 columns of numbers, so we can just use the simple version. It'll calculate the standard deviation, 0.04851. And then I can fill that column as well by clicking on the bottom right-hand corner of the box and dragging down. Then the uncertainty of the mean, standard deviation of the mean, is just the and I use equal sign again for formula. It's equal to standard deviation divided by the square root, and there's a formula for this too, SQRT, n minus 1, 5 minus 1, gives us the uncertainty in the mean. And fill that column. You notice the standard deviation of the mean is not really fitting in the box. You can, one way to solve this is to wrap the text. You can see it wraps the text. It also, I might want to center the labels in there. And what's the important things here? The important things are the mean values. I can use either one. And then also standard deviation of the mean, because that's my data uncertainty. Now I'm going to check all the labels. The mean value, I should probably, this is a mean of the extension, so the value is also in meters. And the standard deviation of the mean is also in meters. I can either I can change the text by going up into this bar here. It's a little bit easier sometimes. Okay, so I think that looks good. Everything's labeled. Now it's time to save this file. I'm going to save it with a date and the name of the project so that it is easy to find later. And it will correspond to whatever it is I put in my lab notebook. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been useful.